Just as the sun was peeking through the oak trees, I walked out to the yard with my usual routine, ready to open the barn and take the herd out to pasture. Morning air in Kansas still carried a touch of mist, the smell of damp earth mixed with dry hay, and it made me feel connected to the 3 generations before me. But that morning, what I saw stopped me cold. Right in front of the barn sat a shiny silver Maserati, blocking the gate like some arrogant wall. The body gleamed so bright it caught the weak sunlight. The tires were spotless, not a speck of dirt on them, a sharp contrast to the muddy ground of the farm. And leaning against it, with sunglasses covering half her face and a half smile on her lips, was none other than Linda Peterson, the HOA president of this neighborhood. The moment she saw me, Linda lifted her latte, her voice sweet but dripping with sarcasm. She said, "Good morning, Mr. Miller. My car needs a spot while the crew repaves my driveway. I hope that old barn isn't too busy to wait a few hours." Hearing that, my throat tightened, because I knew this wasn't about parking for a few hours. With Linda, it was always about showing power. A message that she and her HOA could control every breath of this neighborhood, even from a farmer who'd spent his whole life on this land. I forced my voice to stay calm and told her, "Linda, this isn't a parking lot. This is the barn gate. I need the tractor out now to haul feed for the cattle." Linda shrugged, her cold smile cutting deeper. She replied, "Oh, I'm sure your cows can wait a little for breakfast. You should think about it, Jack. That barn drags down the whole neighborhood's value. Maybe it's time you considered selling." At that moment, a chill ran straight down my spine. Not from the morning air, but from knowing Linda had just crossed every line. And then, silence. Only the wind whispering through the trees and the cattle bawling in the distance. Right then I knew this wasn't just about a car parked in the wrong spot. This was war. That tense morning made me stop and wonder, who does this woman think she is, treating a whole farm like her personal parking lot? To really understand, I guess I need to start from the beginning. My name's Jack Miller. I'm 52 years old, born and raised in a small Kansas town, where summers blaze across the cornfields and winters whip through the wide, open farms with cutting winds. My whole life has been tied to this land, a 3-generation farm that survived blizzards, floods, and more than a few years of drought. My granddad was the first to put up this barn, using oak he cut from the woods behind the house. I still remember what my dad used to tell me. "Jack, this barn isn't just where we keep the cattle. It's the heart of the farm. Lose it, and you lose the rhythm of life here." My father passed down every skill he had. How to patch a fence after a storm. How to plan the crops. How to know when the soil needed rest. In the calluses on my hands, I carried my family's history. And I made myself a promise. I'd keep this place standing until the day I couldn't stand myself. But the past few years, things started changing fast. Families from the city moved in, lured by low taxes and some romantic idea of living close to nature. They brought granite countertops, lawns cut smooth like golf courses, and with them, a strict set of rules from something called an HOA, the Homeowners Association. And the head of that HOA? None other than Linda Peterson. From the very first time she stepped onto my farm, Linda wrinkled her nose, pointed at the barn, and said, "This structure doesn't meet the community's aesthetic standards. It looks unsightly." I laughed out loud, because that barn had stood here long before the new houses popped up, long before Linda bought her first fancy dress. But my laugh only made her more annoyed. That's when the silent war began. Linda wasn't just any HOA president. She lived by the rule book. She printed every page, highlighted every clause, and went door to door like some self-appointed sheriff. Folks said she treated her clipboard like a badge of honor, and every time she smiled, it meant trouble for somebody. The complaints piled up. My rooster crowed too early and ruined her morning meditation. The haystack out back was an eyesore. The smell of cow manure drifted her way on windy days. The tractor was too loud when I worked the fields. All the things that made up normal farm life became excuses for Linda to push harder. I tried to bend. I kept the dogs fenced in. I rebuilt the fence when the wind knocked it down. I even turned off my country music on Saturday mornings. But no matter what I did, Linda found a new violation. That's when it hit me. Linda didn't just hate roosters or cow manure. She wanted more than that. She wanted me gone. Right after that bitter first meeting, the little run-ins with Linda started piling up, like tiny sparks scattered across a dry field. All it would take was one breeze, and the whole place could go up in flames. One spring morning, I was tying up the east fence when I heard the sharp click of high heels on gravel. Linda showed up, clipboard in hand, her voice cold as steel. She said, "Jack, your rooster crowed at 5 in the morning. It ruined my meditation. I need you to keep it quiet." I just shook my head, trying not to laugh. I told her, "Linda, roosters don't use alarm clocks. They crow when the sun comes up. That's nature's rule, not mine." She didn't smile. Linda rarely did, unless it was to mock somebody. A week later, I stacked hay bales high near the fence, and sure enough, she marched over again, lips painted bright red and pressed tight. She ordered, "You need to cover this whole pile with a tarp. Drivers passing the main road can see it. It's unsightly." I raised an eyebrow and asked, "Want me to sew curtains for the cows while I'm at it?" The air was thick with tension. Linda spun on her heels, but I knew for sure there'd be an HOA complaint in my inbox by morning. And of course, I was right. Before long, the list of my offenses grew longer. Dust from harvest blowing onto her lawn. The tractor too loud on weekends. The smell of cow manure not in line with community standards. Once, while I was spreading fertilizer, Linda even marched straight into the yard, pinching her nose, yelling, "Mr. Miller, I'm reporting this. You're turning the neighborhood into a filthy barnyard." Right then, my chest tightened. This wasn't petty whining anymore. This was a campaign. What made it worse were the new neighbors. At first, they stayed neutral, nodding politely while Linda complained. But little by little, caught up in her fake authority, some started looking at me like I was the one who wouldn't adapt. They forgot this land, with all its hard seasons of planting and harvest, was the very reason this town even existed. I still tried to keep the peace. I reminded myself that fighting her openly would only make things worse. I cleaned the yard, trimmed the windbreak trees, even turned down my Saturday morning Johnny Cash. But the more I gave in, the more Linda pushed. One day, I overheard her at an HOA meeting, whispering to another member, "Maybe Jack should think about selling. A few new houses here would really boost property values." The second I heard that, a cold chill ran through me. So that was it. Every complaint, every so-called violation, was just a step in her bigger plan to force me off the land my family had held for 3 generations. That's when I realized Linda didn't just want my old barn gone. She wanted to wipe out my legacy. And this slow-burning feud was bound to explode into a wildfire. It was a Sunday morning, the sun breaking through after a night of rain. The ground was damp, and the air carried the fresh scent of new grass. I stepped out onto the porch with a hot cup of coffee in hand, ready for a familiar routine. Open the barn, feed the cattle, then check the fields. But as I walked closer to the barn, I froze. Right in front of the old wooden doors sat a silver Maserati, gleaming like it had just rolled out of a showroom. Raindrops still clung to the tires, catching the sunlight, making the whole thing sparkle like some piece of jewelry dropped in the wrong place. And leaning against the hood, latte in hand, lips curled in a daring smile, was none other than Linda Peterson. The moment she saw me, her voice came out sweet, but with a sharp edge. "Good morning, Jack. I need a spot while the crew repaves my driveway. I hope your cows don't mind a late breakfast." My throat tightened. I answered slowly, each word heavy as stone. "Linda, this isn't a parking lot. This is the barn gate. I need the tractor out now." She tilted her head, her sunglasses flashing in the bright sun, a cold smile spreading across her face. "Oh, I doubt your cows will starve waiting a few hours. Honestly, Jack, that barn is a stain on this neighborhood. You should really think about selling. A new development could bring a lot more value than hay and manure." Her words cut like a knife. In that moment, the sound of cattle bawling in the distance hit harder than anything Linda said. A few neighbors had gathered by the fence, pretending to walk their dogs, but their eyes never left the scene. Phones lit up, recording, waiting for sparks to fly. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. But in my head, I heard my father's voice. "Son, the barn isn't just wood and nails. It's the heart of the farm. Block the gate, and you block the rhythm of life itself." A chill ran down my spine, not from the morning breeze, but from the truth sinking in. Linda had crossed the last line. This wasn't careless parking. This was a declaration of war. Then the yard went still. Only the wind moving through the trees, the drip of water from the barn roof, and my heartbeat pounding in my chest. Right then, I knew for sure. This was the turning point. And once it started, there'd be no going back. Right after that tense morning, I knew I had to find a way to handle things before they spun out of control. A lifetime of farming had taught me one thing. Losing your temper only costs you more. My dad used to say, "Jack, anger's like fire in a haystack. If you don't put it out fast, it'll burn the whole harvest." So I took a deep breath, went back inside, and picked up the phone. I called the county sheriff's office. On the line was Deputy Collins, his young voice coming through. I explained what was happening: a Maserati blocking my barn gate, keeping me from getting the tractor out to feed my herd. Collins went quiet for a few seconds, then sighed. "Mr. Miller, I understand your frustration, but this falls into a gray area of the law. It's private property, and with the HOA involved, unless there's proof of damage or direct danger, there's not much we can do." Hearing that, my heart dropped. I pressed harder. "Collins, the cattle can't wait. 100 head bawling with hunger, and she knew that when she parked there." He lowered his voice, sounding uneasy. "Mr. Miller, I suggest you bring this up at the HOA meeting. We don't want to get caught in a civil dispute between neighbors." "I'm sorry." I hung up, my hand shaking. Once again, the rules were on Linda's side. That evening, I decided to show up at the HOA meeting at the community clubhouse, a polished room with bottled water lined up and a table long enough to feel like a courtroom. Linda sat dead center, in a chair taller than the rest, like some queen waiting for a challenger to step forward. I spoke straight. "Mrs. Peterson's car blocked my barn all day. I couldn't work. I couldn't care for my livestock. This isn't about looks anymore. This is about interfering with my livelihood." Linda cut me off, her voice sweet but sharp as glass. "Oh, Jack, you're blowing this way out of proportion. I only parked there for a few hours. Your cattle didn't starve. Honestly, that shabby old barn should have been torn down years ago. Clinging to the past only drags down property values for everyone." A few members smirked, nodding along with her. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing my voice to stay steady. "This is protected farmland. That barn stood here before any of you ever moved in. If the gate is blocked, the farm can't function. That's a fact, not an opinion." Then Douglas, one of Linda's closest allies, cleared his throat. "We'll review the property boundaries. But Jack, you should try being more flexible. Someone like Linda brings value to the community. You might want to consider adapting." His words hit me like a blow. The room went quiet, except for the faint tap of a pen against a clipboard. Then the meeting ended without a single solution. I walked out with Linda's soft laughter echoing behind me. That night, I sat on the porch, watching my restless herd in the dark barn, my chest heavy. I had tried patience. I had tried the law. I had tried the council. And every one of them had turned their back. In that moment, I knew one thing for sure. If I was going to protect this land, I'd have to do it myself. The next morning, I stepped onto the porch. New sunlight slanted across the fields, but the Maserati still sat there in front of the barn, shiny like a mocking grin. The cattle were bawling louder than usual, pressing at the fence like they were urging me on. That's when I knew my patience was gone. I walked across the yard, my hands clenching until my knuckles went white. My dad's voice rang in my head, low and steady. "Jack, some things you can talk out. Some things you deal with steel and muscle." Hearing that, a hard kind of resolve rose in me. I didn't see the Maserati as just a car anymore. It was a barrier, a rope around a whole way of life. I cut into the shed where my old John Deere lived. That green tractor had hauled me through seasons, moved thousands of bales, dug holes, set posts. The frame still had a scratch from some storm years back. The leather seat bore my father's worn imprint. I laid my hand on the hood and felt something close to sacred. "Dad," I whispered, "I need this today." I opened the toolbox, checked every bolt, oiled the chains, wiped the dust off the dash. The click of the wrenches sounded like a war drum. Sweat ran down my back, but instead of wearing me out, it fed me. Outside, neighbors started to gather along the fence. A few raised phones, cameras flashing in the sun. I heard the whispering. "Wonder what Jack's gonna do. He won't have the nerve. Wait, this is gonna go town-wide on video." I took a long breath and turned the key. The John Deere roared to life, low and rolling, a sound that rolled across the fields like thunder. Chickens scattered. A few cows lifted their heads. Kids behind the fence shouted in excitement. I drove the tractor into the yard, the big tires rolling and crunching the gravel. Linda stood by the Maserati, sunglasses hiding her eyes but a flicker of worry showing through. She straightened, hands on her hips, and yelled over the engine. "Jack, you won't do it. That's a $200,000 Italian car. Touch it, and my lawyers will crush you before your tractor even gets close." I didn't answer. I sat up straight and gripped the wheel. In that moment, I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. I felt a calm I hadn't known in a long time, like the focus before planting. You know what to do, and you trust the outcome. The yard filled with the engine's growl. I knew then this moment would decide more than just the fate of that car. It would decide whether this farm would keep existing. The John Deere's low rumble rolled across the yard, slamming into the barn walls like the drumbeat before a fight. I sat up straight, hands firm on the wheel, eyes fixed on the shiny silver Maserati still blocking the barn gate. Linda stood a few steps away, arms crossed, trying to look calm. But her tight lips and the little tremor in her hand gave her away. Her voice cut through the engine's growl. "Jack Miller, don't be stupid. If you scratch my car, I'll sue you and take your land." My heart pounded, but not from fear. It was the weight of months of put up with it, the humiliation at HOA meetings, the sound of hungry cows bawling in the dark. I eased the throttle. The tractor rolled forward, the big tires crunching the gravel. Neighbors along the fence held their breath. Someone whispered, "He's really going to do it." I lowered the control lever. The steel bucket at the front dipped, whining as metal dragged on metal. The late sun flashed off the bucket like a blade pulled from its sheath. Linda screamed, her voice cracking. "You're crazy. That's a $200,000 car. Do you hear me?" I didn't answer. I kept pressing the pedal, inching the tractor forward. When the bucket's edge met the Maserati's hood, there was a snap. Metal screamed and warped. The crowd gasped, half in shock, half in thrill. The Maserati started to crumple. The shiny hood folded like a crushed soda can. The windshield shuddered and spiderwebbed with cracks. The alarm wailed, mixed with the cow's calls and the tractor's roar into a wild, chaotic chorus. Linda lunged forward, waving her arms, shouting, "Stop! You'll regret this for the rest of your life." I looked her in the eye through the tractor's dusty windshield. There was no fury in my gaze, only cold resolve. I said, slow and steady, "You should have moved your car when I asked politely." Then I pushed the pedal down. The tractor's huge tires climbed onto the hood, crushing the Maserati's front. Glass shattered, shards glittering in the air like a rain of glass. The crowd jeered, some pulling phones close, shouting like it was a rodeo. With every foot I drove forward, metal screamed like a proud thing losing its crown. The hood caved, leather seats tore apart, airbags blew, white smoke puffing like late flags of surrender. Linda stood frozen, face pale, hands shaking over her mouth. For the first time, I didn't see her arrogant smile. I saw panic. I saw her world falling apart. I kept the tractor on the car's remains, then shut the engine off. The yard fell quiet, save for the soft crackle of bent metal. I climbed down, my boots thudding on the ground. I turned to the neighbors and spoke loud and firm. "Look at this. This isn't just a car. This is how she and the HOA treated my land, my work, my life. I've put up with it long enough. From now on, nobody's allowed to block my barn gate." A beat of silence. Then someone clapped. A few whistles. Soon the fence broke into applause. A couple of neighbors laughed and shouted, "That's right, Jack. Enough's enough." Linda, face bright red, screamed helplessly, "I'll ruin you, Jack Miller. I swear I will in court." I turned back, my voice calm and clear. "Go ahead and try. But my cows will be fed tonight, and that's what matters most." I knew then the fight had entered a new chapter. The Maserati was wrecked, but what had really been crushed was the fake power Linda used to bully this whole community. The last echo of twisted metal was still hanging in the air when the wail of a siren cut through the quiet. Red and blue lights flashed down the dirt road, and minutes later Deputy Collins pulled up in his pickup right at the gate. He stepped out, his eyes wide at the sight. A silver Maserati crushed to scrap under the tractor's tires, and Linda screaming, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She rushed at Collins, fingers stabbing in my direction, her voice hoarse. "Arrest him. He destroyed my property. That's a crime. That's destruction. I demand you cuff him right now." Collins raised his hand for calm, his tone careful. Mrs. Peterson, I need to hear both sides. Please, settle down. I stepped forward, my voice steady but clear. I asked her to move that car over and over. My barn gate was blocked all day. My cattle went unfed. This isn't just parking. This is interfering with farm operations. Linda barked out a laugh, her eyes flashing mean. Farm operations? This is a neighborhood, not a farm. That rotten old barn of yours just drags everyone's property value down. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled a folded, worn paper from my back pocket. I opened it and handed it to Collins. This is a copy of the Agricultural Protection Act. State law says any act that blocks livestock care or lawful farm operations is a violation. My farm is registered. My land has been protected farmland since my family settled it. That car blocking the barn wasn't just an inconvenience. It was cutting off my livelihood. Collins scanned the paper, then gave a small nod. He turned to Linda. Ma'am, by this statute, Mr. Miller has the legal right to keep his barn access clear. Linda's face drained of color. Her voice cracked. No, that can't be. This is a modern neighborhood. That old law can't still apply. Collins shrugged. Mr. Miller's land is still zoned agricultural, Mrs. Peterson. I can't ignore that. In fact, it was your car that violated the law by blocking the barn gate. Murmurs rippled through the neighbors. A few covered their mouths, chuckling. Others nodded in clear agreement. Linda stomped her foot, shouting, He crushed my car. He has to pay for it. I crossed my arms and said calmly, I warned you more than once. You chose not to listen. I did what I had to do to feed my cattle and keep my work alive. Collins sighed, pulling his ticket pad from his pocket. Mrs. Peterson, I'll have to cite you. You're being fined for obstructing farm operations. If it happens again, the penalties will be harsher, maybe even criminal charges. The crowd erupted. Whistles cut the air. One man yelled, That's right. About time somebody put her in her place. Linda spun, searching for a friendly face, but all she met were shaking heads. The same neighbors who'd feared her for years now looked almost satisfied to see her power slipping. I stood quietly by the tractor, my heartbeat finally slowing. This wasn't just my win. It was proof the law still had room for farmers who stood their ground for values no HOA or luxury car could erase. And in Linda's eyes, for the first time, I didn't see arrogance. I saw fear, the fear of someone who'd just lost her throne. Just a few days after the Maserati incident, the HOA called an emergency meeting. The community clubhouse, usually quiet, was packed wall to wall. Chairs lined up in rows, a long table draped in white cloth, water bottles neatly lined up. The air was thick. Everyone waited to see how Linda, the so-called queen of the HOA, would try to spin things. Linda walked in wearing a dark blue dress, her chin high, arms clutching a thick stack of papers. But no matter how hard she tried to look proud, her face was still pale from the fallout. She sat in the chair at the head of the table, tapped her pen hard against the wood, and spoke sharp and loud. Members, what happened was an act of serious vandalism. Jack Miller destroyed my property. I demand the board remove him from this community and force him to pay every dime in damages. The room stirred. Linda was used to commanding silence, but this time the reaction was different. A young mom, whose two kids often rode their bikes around the block, stood up. Her voice shook a little, but she spoke clear. Linda, for years you fined my kids just for drawing chalk on the sidewalk. You called it making the neighborhood look bad. I stayed quiet. But today, I can't stand with you anymore. Linda froze for a beat. Before she could answer, an older man with silver hair, cane in hand, pushed himself up. His voice was gravelly. Last year, you made my wife and me take down the American flag because it didn't match the aesthetic. That flag was our son's gift before he went into the service. Do you have any idea how much that hurt? Whispers rippled through the room. Heads nodded. Linda slammed her pen harder. This isn't story time. The issue is Jack destroyed my car. But a young man in the back shot up, his voice hot. Your car blocked his barn gate all day. Everybody knows cattle can't wait. You picked the fight. Now you're trying to play the victim? The pushback spread like wildfire. One neighbor told how Linda forced him to replace his fence because the wood didn't match. Another said she threatened fines for a work truck parked out front longer than 2 hours. One by one, the stories toppled like dominoes. I sat quietly at the end of the table, watching. I didn't feel gloating. What I saw was a community finally waking up after years of being strangled by false authority. At last, Douglas, the one who'd always stood closest to Linda, sighed and tapped his pen. We need a vote. Who's in favor of keeping Linda as president? Not a single hand went up. The silence was louder than any shouting. Then who's in favor of removing her? Douglas asked. More than half the room raised their hands at once. A few even clapped as they did. Linda's face drained, then flushed red. She shot up, papers scattering across the floor. You'll regret this. I'll sue every one of you. This isn't over. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, heels striking sharp against the tile, echoing like the last angry cry of someone losing her crown. The room stayed still for a few seconds. Then somebody laughed. The laugh spread, then the applause swelled, light and free, like a storm breaking apart. I sat there with my hands on my knees, letting out a slow breath. For the first time in years, the eyes of my neighbors weren't cautious or suspicious. They were full of respect. And I knew, from the moment Linda walked out, this community would never be the same. In the days after Linda was voted out, the whole neighborhood felt different. The road in front of my farm suddenly seemed calmer. No more suspicious stares. No more fines pinned to the barn door. Instead, there was the sound of kids laughing as they rode their bikes, dogs barking playfully in the yards, and friendly nods whenever I drove the tractor by. One evening, as the sun burned red in the west, I walked past the spot in front of the barn. The ground still bore deep marks where the tractor crushed that silver Maserati. The tracks had hardened, darker now, like a scar on skin. I stood there for a long time, smiling to myself. Not because I destroyed a car, but because it reminded me of the day the whole community broke free from one person's grip. Another morning, Ryan, the neighbor kid with a basketball in his arms, ran up and asked shyly, "Uncle Jack, how did you dare to stand up to Mrs. Linda? I've never seen anyone argue with her." I chuckled, patting his shoulder. Sometimes, Ryan, there are battles you can't fight with words alone. You use whatever you've got to protect what matters most. For me, it was my tractor. For you, it might be something else. But the rule's the same. Don't let anyone make you give up what's important. He nodded, eyes shining. And in that look, I caught a glimpse of my younger self. And Linda? She still lives in the neighborhood, but she's quieter now. No clipboard, no sharp lectures. When she passes me, she turns her head, like she hopes the world will forget the Maserati. But no matter how hard she tries, the community hasn't forgotten. They learned that power built on fear collapses the moment people stop bowing their heads. At night, I sit on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching my cattle graze under the moonlight. In that peace, I realized something. The real victory wasn't in crushing a car. It was in holding onto a way of life, a legacy, and a belief. And that's the lesson I want to share with anyone listening. True strength isn't about money, lawyers, or fancy cars. Strength is standing up for what's right, even if it means facing down a whole organization. Have you ever met a Linda in your life? Someone who tried to push you around, control you, make you feel trapped? If you have, share your story. Because maybe, just maybe, the lesson from a tractor and a Maserati will give someone out there the courage to rise up. And if you want to hear more wild stories about HOAs and everyday battles like this, don't forget to hit subscribe. Because I'll tell you one thing. In America, neighbor drama never really sleeps.